Well, welcome everybody to an unusual noon minus the lunch public square. I'm Tom Silvestri, the publisher of the Richmond Times-Dispatch and your moderator here for the 53rd civic conversation of issues that are important to Richmond. We didn't plan to have a post-election public square, but given the news it made, both here and nationwide, we thought we'd install one today at noon, and we thank everybody for coming. And it happened so soon, we did not arrange for any of the participants to be here, but our fallback position is always the esteemed journalistic crew on the newsroom of the Times-Dispatch, three of which of my colleagues are here today. What we hope to do is talk about what happened on Tuesday. It's got a really bold title of The Future of Politics in Virginia. If we can settle that in an hour, I think we're all going to get master's degrees from some university in town. So we'll open it up to questions after we throw at least 4 questions to the panel who have been covering this election. And we're also, as the weekend's batch of update stories have indicated, trying to figure out where we go from here. I always ask this question just so I might have to use the overview on how the public square works. How many have never been to a public square before? Oh, well, welcome all first-timers. How many have been here for more than 5 public squares? Okay, so we have a mix. Just like our building, we have veterans and people here just for a cup of coffee. But we welcome you. Normally the square goes 90 minutes, but because of the afternoon, we're going to go about an hour. You're welcome to participate afterwards. Each of you have name tags on and whether they look good. But when you speak, we have handheld mics, and because the room has better acoustic if you use the microphones, when you do get a chance to ask a question, please identify yourself and speak directly in the mic so everybody can hear. One of the more challenging notions, symbols, or hand gestures that I see from the audience is can't hear. So that's why we have the speech. Looks like we don't have the water here today, Paige, do we?
Not here.
Oh, well, what would be a public square without free water? It's been brewed specially for number 53, so if you feel yourself parched, feel free at any time. Bill in the back. We promise if you do drink the water, we will not call you at 7 o'clock and ask you about your subscription. That's a joke. All right, so gentlemen of the jury, of the political team, I have a couple of questions. We can get this going. Why don't we start off by introducing ourselves first, Andrew?
Hi, I'm speaking too loudly.
Here we go.
Hi, I'm Andrew Cain. I'm the politics editor. Welcome.
I'm Jim Nolan, politics reporter, cover the governor, the state legislature, and state government.
Jeff Schapiro, politics columnist.
Is your mic on, Jeff?
It was.
Yeah, just bend it towards your face. Okay, now speak.
Jeff Schapiro, politics columnist.
There you go. All right, good. So I've got 4 quick questions to start off, and we all thought during the we'll get an adjustment there. These Madonna mics require a whole training exercise later on. Fortunately, they're not Miley Cyrus's. So let's get right to it. The polls showed Mark Warner with a significant lead for most of the campaign season. And then we saw Ed Gillespie get within 1,000 votes of Warner. Why did the polls get it wrong, Jim Nolan?
Well, almost every poll got this one wrong. I was talking with Larry Sabato at the University of Virginia, and he said nobody really had this one right. And I think when I talked with one of the pollsters, because Quentin Kidd over at the Wasson Center had been doing frequent polling on this race, and it had gone from a double-digit lead for Warner to, in the closing days, within a week of the actual election, about 7 points according to the CNU Wasson Center poll. But one thing that was interesting about what Quentin said is it's his theory that the electorate in Virginia, especially in a midterm, is very volatile when it comes to the unaffiliated voters. Obviously, everybody knows in the midterm you need to get out your base, and clearly the Republicans got out more of their base than the Democrats, who largely, especially in the urban crescent of 95, stayed at home when it came to Warner. But what Quentin was saying was that as things started to pick up, and we might give a little bit of credit, although his polling did not quite reinforce this, to the Puckett scandal and Warner's involvement or tangential involvement in that. What Quentin was saying was that the race was moving quickly toward the closing days. There was a lot of momentum for Gillespie. After being off the air for part of October, he was back on the air with new ads. And of course, people start to tune in toward the end of a cycle. And what he said is that in the polling, which they did over a 6-day period, they found that as the week progressed, say they'd interview 110, 120 people a day. And these are largely student-run polls. They're supervised, and obviously they're professional, but they're students making the call. So on any given day, they have maybe 100, 110, 120 potential people that they can contact. Early on in the week, they were getting fairly stable, familiar results. He said the last few days of the 6-day polling period, the Gillespie support started to tick up. And so even though over the 6-day period, the average came out to a 7-point advantage for Warner, which obviously did not hold up, that he could tell toward the end of the poll that things were increasingly getting closer and that Gillespie had momentum, which speaks to the frailty of a poll, specifically that it's only a snapshot. And depending on when you take the photo, as many people who have been in our paper and who work for our paper will tell you, you can get an entirely different read on what's actually happening. And I think in this particular case, things move very fast, and it speaks to the issue of Virginia as a truly purple state, but as a very volatile purple state, and one in which on any given moment a group of people decide to stay home, a group of people get motivated, you can swing an election very easily.
We'll get into that red-blue color in a minute, a question to Jeff, but the other issue that's somewhat related to it is money. So the Republican leadership didn't put much money into the Virginia Senate race. Why not? Andrew, you were checking these numbers repeatedly up until the election.
Yeah, it's an interesting phenomenon that we've seen for 2 years in a row in Virginia, in which, according to the analysts, the supposedly smart money has stayed out of Virginia in what turned out to be potentially winnable elections. For some perspective, in North Carolina, we had what always was seen as a close U.S. Senate race. Tom Tillis, a Republican, defeated Senator Kay Hagan, a Democrat, by 48,000 votes, while outside groups, super PACs and others, put $81 million into that race, which had a margin of 48,000 votes. In Virginia, Mark Warner won by fewer than 17,000 votes, and outside groups put $2.6 million into the Virginia race. What does that mean? Well, Jim mentioned that Ed Gillespie was off the air for part of October when people are first starting to tune in, and the supposedly smart money stayed out, and that money could have made a difference. In 2013, Ken Cuccinelli came within about 3 percentage points of winning the race for governor, even though Terry McAuliffe, the Democrat, outspent it by $15 million. So what we're seeing is the supposed smart money nationally for the Republicans has stayed out 2 years in a row in these off-year elections in which they potentially could have made a difference and prevailed. And one of the reasons for that, and I'm sure Jeff will talk about this, is turnout means everything in Virginia's statewide races. The higher the turnout, the better the Democrats do. Well, in these off-year elections, when you have a 42% turnout, we're very competitive, and more money could certainly have made a difference here.
Some of the New York cable TVs drew particular attention to one ad that Ed Gillespie ran during the Redskin-Cowboy game. What can you say about that? And if you'd ran 2 or 3, would you have cut the margin? Just teasing.
Ed Gillespie did a couple of things in the late going to inject some humor into the campaign and to sort of humanize himself. What Tom is talking about is during the Monday Night Football game between the Redskins and the Cowboys, Ed Gillespie put up an ad in which he said, Senator Warner won't take a stand on Reed's bill that would penalize the Redskins for the team's name. And Ed Gillespie smiled and said, well, I'll tell you, I don't think that's government's business. I think a business should make its own determination. And so that had some appeal. That had some appeal among Redskins fans, some of them, and it sort of broke through the finger pointing, and it got him a little bit of buzz in the Lake.
You mentioned the colors that are changing. Let me put up the map that we use. Quite interesting, the patterns. And I'm going to bring Jeff Schapiro up and talk about the demographic changes. And Professor Schapiro, you may want to refer to the map and stretch your legs if you don't want to hurt your neck about it. What is this showing you in? How have the demographic changes in Virginia affected the outcomes of elections in recent years, particularly when they're statewide races?
Well, I think an outsider would look at the map.
Feel free to
An outsider would look at the map of Virginia and scratch his or her head, wondering how could Mark Warner have prevailed. And of course, where the votes are most abundant is where Warner Democrats traditionally do the best. And it's largely along that Interstate 95, I-64 corridor that runs from the D.C. suburbs down to the seacoast. It's by no means locked in. There's a lot of red, and I guess this is more like gray than blue. But outside of the population centers, areas where Warner prevailed have abundant numbers of African Americans. Prince Edward County, for example, where public schools were closed in defiance of court-ordered desegregation, is now an island of blue in the middle of a very, very red countryside. That's not just enfranchised African Americans. That's liberal faculty at Longwood and, strange as it may seem, a few in Hampton-Sydney. Also Richmond and Wycombe, Charles City, Surrey, Sussex, down to the south side, also areas with large numbers of African American voters. Montgomery County, basically Virginia Tech land, again, those dangerous liberals that one finds in great numbers in higher education. Allegheny County, surprisingly large number of labor voters. Albemarle, which is kind of becoming the Westchester County of Virginia, attracting large numbers of hedge funders who are trying to escape New York taxation, but bring their moderate politics with them. Nelson County was a little bit of a surprise, but nonetheless a good day there for Mark Warner. And Northampton County, a majority African American jurisdiction. Despite these wins, as the politicians say, the performance of these traditional Democratic voters was not nearly as high as it had to be for Warner to win comfortably. And it all came down to a blue wall up in Fairfax County. To give you an idea just how underwhelming the Democratic vote was on election day, Loudoun County, a county that Warner has comfortably covered, prevailed. It lost by just about 500 votes. Barbara Comstock, the Republican congressperson-elect from the 10th district, ran very, very strong in Loudoun and clearly gave Gillespie a lift, kind of reverse coattails. What does this say about Virginia? It says, again, that the urban-suburban crescent is becoming more moderate because it is attracting more and more people from outside of Virginia. One of the figures that I've always found intriguing, and I've mentioned this in visits with other groups, how Virginia has been transformed from a state in which natives dominated its politics to one in which non-natives do. At the turn of the 20th century, there were about 2.3 million people living in Virginia, of whom 90% were born here. Here we are in the early years of the 21st century, population is approaching 8.5 million. 50% of the people who live here were born here. So all these come here, I guess myself among them. We are bringing different ideas, different cultures, different traditions, different voting habits. That's clearly coloring our politics, and increasingly purple. One of the problems I think we're running into is that as the electorate in Virginia becomes more nationalized, if you will, this means that even at the local level, when people are traditionally choosing as their elective representatives the people who kind of live and work among them, friends and neighbors, party labels are really beginning to count for something, even at the neighborhood level. And that, I think, is driving, or is magnifying, the polarization that we're seeing in Virginia. I don't know if I was filibustering.
No, we'll leave the map up for consultation with the audience later on. Andrew, you usually edit, Jeff. Anything you might want to add?
Andrew usually wants to subtract.
Jokes aside, one of the interesting things we're finding in talking to the analysts after this election is that folks in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party say the map is more and more being locked in at the statewide level. There are 133 cities and counties in Virginia. Looking at 2016 and 2017, we could comfortably shade in right now perhaps 120 of those localities. There are very few that are in play. What that means is that elections are all about turnout now in Virginia. In a presidential year, when 71% of the folks turn out, the Democrats maximize their advantage in that corridor that Jeff talked about, going from Northern Virginia to the Richmond area to Hampton Roads. When the turnout plummets in what we call off-year elections, such as the contest for governor or a Senate race in which the presidential election is not on the ballot, when we have 42% turnout, it makes a huge difference. For instance, 2012, President Obama wins Fairfax County alone by 108,000 votes. Comes out of Northern Virginia up collectively 230,000 votes. You look at the year later, 2013, when Governor McAuliffe wins by 3 percentage points statewide, he comes out of Northern Virginia up 136,000 votes. If we look at the Warner-Gillespie race, even fewer people voted statewide, 60,000 fewer than in 2013. What does that mean? It means that Warner wins Northern Virginia by only 106,000 votes compared to Obama's 230,000. When they take down the margins in the population centers, the sea of red helps Republicans compete. But the higher the turnout, the better the Democrats do.
And this is magnified by redistricting. If you make the you can maximize the advantage, the partisan advantage, by controlling the lines, and that's what we're seeing at the legislative level. To Andrew's point about turnout, one of the head scratchers for Democrats, and I don't know that it's really all that big a question. Why was Warner having such a hard time turning out his vote? Clearly, one factor was that he distanced himself from the president, which is strange. I mean, the voting record speaks for itself. And there are clearly ways that Warner could have used the association with Barack Obama to his advantage. Maybe a fundraiser in Northern Virginia, black-oriented radio, advertising, targeting single and working women. But there was none of that. And there are lots of people today who are, Democrats who are complaining about just that. So I think that there were certain advantages associated with even a battered Obama brand that Warner could have used somewhat surgically, perhaps to drive up the margin.
Real quickly, another point that we haven't explained in the paper yet is, remember Congressman Bobby Scott, who represents that majority-minority district that snakes from the Richmond area down to Hampton Roads. He was unopposed on the ballot on Tuesday, which meant there was a disincentive for folks in that congressional district, which is majority-minority, to come out and vote. So that likely helped depress Senator Warner's turnout among African Americans in that corridor who were key to his support.
we focused on, of course, the big race, the U.S. Senate race. Anything you might want to add about the congressional races? Now you brought up the unopposed Bobby Scott race.
Yeah, we have 3 new members of Congress in Virginia. One is Dave Bratt, with whom I'm sure you're all familiar by this point, the giant killer who knocked off Congressman Cantor back in the June primary. Also, we had a hard-fought race up in the 10th district, which stretches from McLean, Fairfax County, west to Winchester, which Delegate Barbara Comstock defeated John Faust, a member of the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors, to win the seat held by Frank Wolf, who's retiring, the dean of the delegation. And up in Northern Virginia, which is reliably Democratic, in the 8th district, Don Beyer, familiar face who had been lieutenant governor for 2 terms, ran for governor as a Democrat in '97. He easily won the race to succeed Jim Moran, who's also retiring. The congressional districts are gerrymandered, or gerrymandered, as Jeff correctly says. So they're very predictable. We have very little competition at this point in our congressional races, but that could change because there's a legal battle going regarding the drawing of the district maps.
One final question before we throw it to the audience. We're not used to seeing Virginia show up as a factor in the big races. What do you think is going to happen in 2016, given this election, one more to go, and the big presidential election, where an incumbent will not be running?
Oh, it's certainly going to be a factor. I think ever since Virginia came through for Obama in 2008, I think it put it on the map. It was a state that was generally ignored by major campaigns because it was considered reliably red. I think Obama's election, Jeff, you correct me, was the first time in 30 years, over 30
since 1964.
That Democratic won 40 years, well, almost 40 years since a Democrat had taken the state. So Virginia is one of those bellwether states, which, looking forward to 2016, obviously makes the stakes even higher when you've got Terry McAuliffe as your governor, a Democrat who just happened to run Bill Clinton's successful presidential campaign and ran Hillary Clinton's unsuccessful presidential campaign into 2008. So there's a lot of pressure in Virginia. The current governor is going to want to deliver Virginia for the likely presumptive Democratic nominee. So there's going to be a tremendous amount of attention paid here. But clearly, as the Warner election demonstrated, it's all a question of can you get out the Obama base that turned out with advanced micro-targeting and demographics that allowed the president to summon more votes than previously thought available to him. Now, to the credit of the Republicans this year touted an advanced get out the vote system where they're taking the Democratic model and attempting to improve on it. Now, clearly, this was a motivated base in Virginia. They were very successful. Warner, perhaps in carrying out his image as a radical centrist, perhaps did not feel compelled to reach out to the Obama demographic. Perhaps he was concerned about the national political winds blowing against a Democrat in light of the controversy over Obamacare and a sluggish economy in which Virginia's economy is lagging. But clearly, 2016 is all going to be about getting these gray counties to highly perform. This looks a lot like the map of Pennsylvania.
That's supposed to be blue.
Well, okay, we'll call them blue then. And this is supposed to be red, but it looks kind of orange to me. It reminds me, when I worked in Pennsylvania, there used to be a common joke, and many Democrats were elected this way statewide. You won Philadelphia, you won southeastern Pennsylvania, and you won Pittsburgh. And people said, well, what's between Philadelphia and Pittsburgh? And the answer was Alabama. and I think what we could be moving to here, which is what Andrew alludes to, is urban-focused, high population areas, that crescent of Democratic voters, which could effectively negate the lesser populated parts of the state, which dominate the acreage, not the votes.
And the speed with which these changes have taken place. I mean, At the close of the Second World War, which as an event really kind of established the suburban template in Virginia, as the government was spending, and people were moving. Even at the close of the Second World War, Virginia was still a state in which 2/3 of the people who lived here live in the countryside. It's now completely reversed. 2/3 of the people who live here live in cities or suburbs. That's where the economic power is, that's where the voting strength is. It's also where the competition for voters' attention is greatest. Politicians are simply not competing with each other, they're competing with whatever's available at the moment in this 8,000 channel universe or whatever's streaming on their handheld. This means that often what gets the voters' attention tends to be pretty simple, maybe highly emotive, maybe even trivial. Say what one will about Jim Gilmore and his campaign for governor in 1997. You know, he boils it down to, depends on your perspective, 3 words or 3 syllables, no car tax, and won in a landslide.
You can make an argument now, and it sounds counterintuitive because, as Jeff noted, no Democrat had won the presidential contest here since 1964 when President Obama did it in 2008. You can make an argument now that the presidential election is the easiest election in the cycle for Democrats because of the speed of the demographic change. Remember, 2012, 3.89 million Virginians go to the polls, 71% turnout, maximizes the Democrats' advantage. If they come out of Northern Virginia up 200,000 votes, they come out of Hampton Roads up a net of 100,000 votes. There are not enough Republican votes in the red to make it up. So we'll see what happens. Virginia will certainly be in play, but the Democrats start out with an advantage because of the maximized turnout in the presidential year.
Okay, those are the quick overviews, the ramifications, the history, the demographics, and the implications going forward as we head to the 2016. Now we turn to the audience. My colleagues Paige Mudd and Bob Rayner have the handhelds. If anybody has a question or observation to participate in this 53rd, first hand up, I think, and then over here. Right in the middle.
I'm always curious about...
We're going to have to get the mic because of the room.
Yeah, hang on.
Bob's coming up behind you.
Move it fast.
I'm always curious about the third...
Could you just say, can you just... You're the first guy, so...
George Cole Scott.
There you go.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
I'm always curious about the third party person. I've been voted for them, but my question is, has any analysis been done that if he hadn't been in the race, how would it have affected the election with the other two?
Yes.
There's a presumption by some of the Republicans that had Robert Sarvis, the Libertarian, not been in the gubernatorial election last year or the Senate election this year, that perhaps the Republican nominee could have won. Sarvis will tell you that he believes that he takes out of both parties' hides because he thinks that socially he's closer to the Democrats' positions, economically he's a free market guy, he's closer to the Republican positions. So it's up to debate, but certainly the Republicans were not pleased that a Libertarian was in those statewide races.
Is he going to always run? I mean, is he running for himself, or is he running to establish the Libertarian Party?
I think he's trying to establish the Libertarian Party. He brought in a number of congressional nominees this year, and a lot of them were first-time candidates who didn't have a lot of experience, but that's how you build a brand, by getting yourself out there. What hurts him is that he only got 2 percentage points this year, which is fewer than he got in the gubernatorial election. So
Consider it with you.
Answer your question, George? Okay. We have one over here.
In the, you call this the future of Virginia politics. Rick Curry, sorry.
That's right.
Or you call this the future of Virginia politics. What do you see as the impact, especially on the 7th and 4th districts, after the lawsuit as the second district has to be redone?
That is that's a real work in progress as a legal dispute goes. A week ago, Friday, Republicans announced that they would be appealing the decision of the federal court overturning the boundaries of the 3rd district. In essence, the court said that the Virginia General Assembly, largely a Republican-dominated General Assembly, had intentionally packed disproportionate numbers of African-American voters in a single district to create friendlier, largely more heavily white districts surrounding it. That being appealed is important because the South is part of the National Republican Foundation. And if a district can be overturned in the Upper South, where politics can be pretty competitive, imagine what might happen in, say, Mississippi or Georgia or South Carolina, that the Republicans were concerned that this would embolden other appeals. Now, ultimately, there's a pretty good chance those lines are going to have to be redrawn. To what effect is not clear, but with a Republican legislature and a Democratic governor, it's an opportunity for McAuliffe, using his veto, to force changes that might make for more competitive, in multiples, congressional districts. Now, of course, ultimately, the court is going to have the last word, and it's entirely possible that the court could draw the lines. The Republicans are very nervous about that. They're also nervous that Democrats will be emboldened to challenge in federal court state legislative lines, having seen a congressional challenge prevail. So there are a lot of moving parts in that, and it's while it has an enormous impact on the effectiveness or the lack of effectiveness of our legislative bodies, I think redistricting remains an issue that is a mystery to most people. And if I had to guess, I suspect that the legislature will happily go about its business trying to preserve the Republican advantage. Again, the problem that they're going to have immediately is a Democratic governor who will have a chance to use his veto or his power to recommend amendments. Republicans don't have the 2/3 vote in both houses, both the House and the Senate, that they would need to override a McAuliffe veto.
Rick, more to your point, just expound on what Jeff says, I think it's highly unlikely that there will be a negotiated compromise on congressional redistricting with the governor and the Republican leadership. I think this is going to the courts. I think the courts are going to decide it. I think the Democrats have done the calculus and concluded that they will probably fare better if a court redraws these lines. What those lines might look like, I was speaking with a Republican at Dave Bratt's headquarters on election night, and he envisioned almost a rotation of Richmond and part of Henrico into the 4th rather, and then a rotation down with New Kent. Something almost like a counterclockwise shift in
I feel like we need a whiteboard for you.
territories. No, I hope that sort of does it. But I really think that the one thing that the Republicans could have given the governor that he wanted was healthcare reform. And now that that's not there, I think that their thinking is that they're going to do better off in the courts than they might try to negotiate something with the state leadership.
The danger of this for the Republicans is that both parties, the party in charge after the census, has always drawn districts for partisan advantage. Democrats did this for years, Republicans have done it more recently. The danger is that if it goes to the courts on the governor's veto, the courts will use the constitutional rationale, which is drawing districts that are compact, contiguous communities of common interest, not for partisan advantage. So Bob Holsworth, veteran analyst, has said that under that scenario, Republicans could lose 2, even 3 congressional seats in Virginia.
And just a footnote to this, when Governor McDonald was elected, he was elected in part on a promise to somehow take politics out of redistricting, and ultimately, you know, he didn't. He said a lot of nice, friendly, encouraging things, but really didn't apply the weight of his office to it. And there were a number of organizations that were encouraging the governor to take some fairly provocative stands, which would have put him at odds with the legislature. And he met with one group, and the story goes that he'd made up his mind that he essentially wasn't going to do anything. And he said to someone in the group that he read the Constitution of Virginia very carefully. This had to do with legislative redistricting. And he said the Constitution says that districts must be compact and contiguous and reflect communities of interest. But there's nothing in the Constitution that says those districts have to be competitive.
Other questions? Yes, sir, in the middle here. Thank you, Bob. Welcome.
Thank you. Charles Haig from Richmond. This forum is about talking about the future of Virginia. And next year, the entire House and Senate will be up for election. How do you see this election affecting those that very critical election next year that will control the legislature in Virginia?
Well, remember, the map is getting more and more locked in, so the elections are all about turnout. If only 40% or thereabouts turned out to vote for a U.S. Senate election, imagine how many fewer are going to come out and vote in legislative elections. And Jeff talked about how we've become a state largely of, in Jeff's term, come-heres. These are folks who, imagine Northern Virginia, a lot of folks come in to work for the federal government and stay, or they come in to work for the Beltway bandits, contractors, or businesses. There are folks who are not from Virginia, they're not as wedded to the local elections, they're not as knowledgeable about what goes on in Richmond. So, presidential year, 72% turnout. Gubernatorial year, 42% turnout. This Senate race, about 40%. If we have fewer than a third of the voters, that could maximize the Republican advantage because their base will turn out and they could conceivably make some gains. The governor will compete, but in a lower turnout, it maximizes the Republican advantage.
I think the real game going into 2015 is focused on the Senate. The 2-to-1 dominance of the House Republicans is not going to be overcome. It would take a federal court overturning the lines, how the lines were drawn, to really begin to impact that kind of change, because the votes just aren't there in most of these districts. Republicans have protected themselves, and along the way they protected some Democrats too. But in the Senate, there are probably at least 4 Senate districts that are going to be competitive, or in which the Democrats, rather, will attempt to compete. 2 of those are in the Beach. Frank Wagner and Jeff McWaters will likely have challenges. Here in the Richmond area, John Watkins of Powhatan will probably expect a challenge because I think there's a palpable sense that those are vulnerable districts that they could claim. Remember, Ed Houck used to have the district now currently occupied by Bryce Reeves. It changed some a few years ago in that election, but Bryce, thank you, Andrew. Bryce Reeves could be targeted as well. So I think there are 3 to 5 Senate districts that Democrats will attempt to retake next year with the idea of trying to regain the majority. And once they do that, then they can be a counterbalance to the Republicans. Of course, remember, the Democrats have to hold on to certain districts in which they have not been traditionally strong. They lost out in Roanoke when Phil Puckett resigned. Ben Chafin is now the senator there. And Chuck Colgan, who's decided to retire out of Prince William. That is a district that could very easily go Republican. And so they have to play some defense as well, but I expect to see the Democrats go on the attack to try and reclaim 2 of those 5 target seats.
And remember, Senator Colgan, venerable senator, represents Prince William County, but his district takes up part of the western end of Prince William County. Prince William is a tale of two counties in one. The eastern part of it, Woodbridge, Dale City, is very much blue. The western part, which is not as populous, is red. And part of Senator Colgan's district takes up that red portion.
Well, speaking of legislature, we've got them in town this week. Can you tease up what's going to happen this week?
Well, there are some plans to elect some judges, a new Supreme Court justice, some folks on the appellate court. A blogger is going to be installed as a former blogger, a former partisan blogger is going to be installed on the Court of Appeals. Chad Dotson, former prosecutor from out Southwest Virginia. Looks like a restaurateur is going to be sitting on the Circuit Court of Richmond. Ryan Marchand practices law in town, but also has kind of been on the cutting edge of the food scene here. He's off to become a circuit judge. And then there is some gamesmanship going on over how Virginia finances its transportation program. The Republicans are feeling sort of nervous about what has been done or not, and so we're going to be seeing some gamesmanship there. And actually, it's sort of an interesting preliminary to the regular session, which begins in January, when, because of the absence of federal action, Virginia will not be able to collect sales taxes on internet purchases, which will force an automatic increase in the fuel tax in an election year. So there are a lot of Republicans who are very nervous about that.
Okay. Who else? The audience? Babe, you're going to have to work the right side. No one on the left side wants to speak to you. Yes, sir.
Back to the 2015 elections, and I guess I'm Robert Jones. I guess I'm a little skeptical regarding what districts are perceived as competitive. And if you look at them, what I've done is try to look at partisan performance and pick those districts between 47.5 and 52.5, and I find 6 in the Senate, 6 competitive races. There's about 9 in the House if you do the same thing. All 6 of those Senate races are held by incumbent Democrats.
Well, I certainly think Watkins is going to face a substantial challenge this year. And talking with Democratic leadership, I know they intend to go after McWaters and Wagner. I think they think that they're vulnerable. And Reeves certainly is a possibility. And they have to play defense with Miller in Newport News and with Colgan, who's obviously leaving. But I think they've decided, and it's not like you like their chances, but I think they've decided that they want to get those, they need to get those 2 votes back. And, but really, what it comes down to, I think, probably is looking beyond 2015. Frankly, it's looking to 2016, because we've seen how much influence you have when you control all 3 statewide offices. Now, the LG is no longer effective because Democrats no longer control the Senate, but certainly having an attorney general who backs up a governor's executive orders or his appointments, or I think it's almost become the path that Democrats can hold on to power now, even if you're not controlling the Senate and the House. If you've got a governor with a veto-proof constituency in the legislature, you're going to still be able to call a lot of the shots. Imagine if it had been a McAuliffe governorship and an Obenshain attorney general. I think we'd have a lot more
Mischief,
for sure. So the Democrats, even if they're not successful in 2015, will look to 2016 and 2017 as a way to build and expand upon their success on a statewide level, playing off the presidential model of bringing out more people to vote. If you win the governor's race, if you win the attorney general's race, it's still going to be pretty hard, as long as you have some measure of balance in one of the houses, to have one party impose its will on the other.
Well, yeah, Andrew's always put it somewhat neatly. You know, he talks about how every election in Virginia has a different electorate. And we saw that, you know, this year statewide. Imagine the kind of electorate that is produced with gerrymandered districts, in which the narrowest bands of the electorate have disproportionate power. I mean, my guess is that in the 2015 State Senate and House of Delegates districts, the turnout is going to be under 30%, I mean, in the aggregate. And you will see you know, people elected to districts with, you know, in proportion the number of votes that you might need to win a councilmanic seat in the city of Richmond. I mean, I'm overstating this, but just to illustrate the power that redistricting has over the outcome. It's minimized the competition. It's certainly created a culture in Richmond within the General Assembly in which members talk past each other rather than with each other. If the districts were more competitive, the ability to, you know, fashion credible solutions would be greater.
A question in the back, Bob?
Yeah, Paul, my name's Paul Malmquist. I have a question about the 7th district race results. I noticed in the election for the two-month term versus the 2-year term, there was an independent in the 2-year term contest, and the result was that Trammell lost about 1,000 votes over his election total, and Brad lost about 500. My question is, the other candidate, Carr, who was in that race in the independence position, he ended up getting 5,000 votes. I was wondering if y'all could explain why there was such a larger turnout for Carr that didn't show up for Trammell and Brad in the previous election.
The Carr vote?
Yes, where did that come from?
Came from a lot of people who didn't like their choices.
They opted out in the previous election, two-month term election?
Carr wasn't on the ballot in the special
Carr,
election.
yeah, Carr's not on the ballot in the special election.
But the loss of votes wasn't great enough to make up for the 5,000 votes Carr got.
I think he's saying that there were 5,000 votes for Carr, but only 1,500 lost on the other two candidates. So where did that other 3,500 go to? Is that right? And that was a special election. I'll answer that. I think the special election, a lot of people...
Guy with the microphone rules. Go ahead, Bob.
A lot of people didn't bother to vote in the special election because either it was more difficult to do or they just they didn't take the time because they knew it was just for a few months. I think that's part of the answer. But you guys may know.
Well, in fairness,
you looked a little confused, so it's
Yeah, no, I was trying to, didn't quite understand the question, but I mean, I think Bratt and Trammell was two unlikely candidates. I don't think anybody in the 7th districts thought that that would be their choice. I think they thought it would be Eric Cantor versus somebody else. And Trammell only filed to run in the closing ticks because I think the Democrats just took stock of their lot and said, if we don't mount a challenge to a sitting House Majority Leader, what kind of a party are we? And Trammell jumped in. It was his first time in elective politics. Bratt, I was there the night that he was declared. I was there the moment he was declared, and he didn't believe it. He didn't. He literally didn't believe it. He's like, it's a miracle. That's what he said to me. It's a miracle. And of course, behind that miracle was a lot of grassroots support, a lot of motivated Tea Party voters who were disenchanted with how their numbers had been treated in previous congressional district party contests. And they came out in force, and as a result, you had a choice between Dave Bratt and Jack Trammell, two Randolph-Macon professors. Neither of these guys really went at each other a whole lot. I think Trammell knew enough about the district to know that it's blood red, and his chance of doing anything was going to depend on whether Dave Bratt did something that really messed it up, which he didn't. And so really the interesting thing about the 7th, I think, is what happens 2 years from now. when we have redistricting. And does the establishment, of which the Cantor machine was, constituted the establishment in Henrico and the 7th, do they field a candidate to challenge Brett? Does Brett get squeezed out in a redistricted, a court-ordered redistricting in which the existing Republican congressmen are preserved or try to preserve themselves? The 7th is really going to be interesting, not because there's really a question of whether a Republican is elected in it next time, but whether that Republican will be Dave Brett.
The other thing to remember, what happens in 2016? It's the presidential year. Turnout soars. It changes the calculus completely. Remember, when Mark Warner is first elected to the Senate, what year is it? 2008, presidential turnout. President Obama's first run. So Mark Warner wins that race over Jim Gilmore by 31 percentage points. Mark Warner didn't suddenly become inept in this election. He runs this time with a 40% turnout compared with the 72% turnout. All those folks in the base don't show up. It changes the calculus completely. So if Mark Warner's on a national ticket in 2016, he'll have a presidential turnout. If he runs again in 2020, presidential turnout. This could well be the toughest race he ever runs.
And another possibility for 2016, occasionally mentioned, is Tim Kaine, who has already endorsed Mrs. Clinton should she run. That, of course, would, I think, generate additional interest in Virginia and its place in the national equation.
Just for the record, Professor Trammell did beat Professor Bratt in the student popularity race, based on your reporting. He remains a victor in his
And that gets him a great job at Randolph-Macon College.
Yes, sir. Welcome.
I'm Dennis Bussey. A lot of Americans would view the election of last Tuesday as a historic nationwide slapdown of the entire big government leftist agenda of President Obama and the Democratic Party. Do any of you disagree with that?
What is your source on a lot?
The source on the lot?
Yeah, I mean, you said a lot. I mean, based on what you read, polls.
That's the sense that I've gotten by reading, listening, the news media, everything that I have been able to pick up on. That to me is the take-home message of what happened on Tuesday. So I'm wondering if anybody here disagrees with that.
And that's also good. That's also a good question for the audience as well to chime in on. Good question.
I think it's fair to say that incumbent presidents often do not fare well in the 6th year of the presidency in that midterm, because that is an opportunity for voters who might have some buyer's remorse, who have concerns, to voice their opinion. It often is a referendum on the president's policies. So while certainly some individual races had their own factors, I think it's fair to say that in this race, as in many other two-term presidencies, I don't know whether it's completely a repudiation, but it's certainly an expression of dissatisfaction. We've seen the president's polls have been low. His personal approval rating has been low in Virginia and other states. So I think there's some truth in that.
President George W. Bush, President Obama's predecessor, was quoted in an interview over the weekend in which he said, frankly, he thinks what happened to Obama is what happened to him. In Bush's second midterm, the Senate went to the Democrats. Former President Bush attributes this entirely to fatigue with his presidency, and that it has set in on a kind of cyclical basis with Obama as well. I think there are probably some other factors, and I don't think the turnout can be discounted. In Virginia, when fewer people participate, the landscape is favorable to Republicans. And I think there's some evidence that maybe the Democrats, after now 8 years, or nearly 8 years, in power, are sort of run down, worn out, maybe short on some new ideas. But that will eventually swing back in their direction, as it did in 2008 with Barack Obama.
Boy, Paige has somebody.
Karen Mashpee, a statement and then a question. Statement. We had, the Democratic Party had in Virginia in the 7th District at least 3 candidates that we vetted. And I was just on an informal committee and probably an unimportant person on that committee. And Trammell did come in at the last minute, and we said goodbye to one of the candidates who is eager to perhaps run again. So there are candidates and there are people interested in getting candidates, and we think that 2016 might be an excellent time to take on Brad again. Question about gerrymandering. Sorry, I don't say gerrymandering. I'm very involved in a statewide effort to change the way we redistrict in Virginia. And looking at the General Assembly that we have and how we will have to try to get legislators to vote against their interests. And we're going to try in 2015, 2017, and 2019 to change the Constitution. I'm very pessimistic, and I want to know if there's any way any of you three see a General Assembly passing a constitutional amendment against their interests to install a fair redistricting.
Before we do that, how many people say gerrymandering? And how many people say gerrymandering?
Isn't that why I say gerrymandering?
I don't want to know, but I just wanted to know what the audience wanted to know. But you can sneak it into
The root of it is the former Vice President Elbridge Gary from Massachusetts. So Jeff says his name was pronounced Gary, so it should be gerrymandering. But everybody says gerrymandering.
This is a clue of what goes on in the newsroom with arguments.
But to Karen's
yes, please.
question, I would share your pessimism, and I wonder, and having recently discussed this with a lawyer who had a very big appellate practice, and he wonders if in great periods of political polarization, and we can look over our history and see them, in which the courts ultimately get us off the dime. And maybe could we be heading to a moment in representation and how it is viewed through the filter of the law, akin to Baker v. Carr, which was one man, one vote. Now we've seen how computers and partisanship can undercut that. So I'm just throwing that out as a possibility if legislators are not prepared to surrender the source of their power, if the electorate isn't really interested, at least the electorate at large, maybe it's the courts that will move us off the dime. Look what's happened with same-sex marriage. But clearly a national consensus has emerged on it, largely or in part through the courts. Could we be heading in that direction with representation?
Time for a couple more questions. Yes, sir.
Don Blake. You guys are very gifted and talented, and I enjoy reading and writing, especially you, Jeff. I didn't know that Andrew edited your commentary. You do a good job editing his commentary. It's interesting to me to look at the perspective of who the voters are. We had 3 national people elected, went to the Senate, 2 to the House, one from Texas, I think Arizona, and Tim Scott in the black community. What do you see as the future with the black voter as they become more educated, they see more black Republicans in state, local, and national campaigns?
I think when we talk about demographics in Virginia, in our team, we use the analogy of rising sea levels. It's not a question of whether the sea levels are going to rise to certain levels. It's a question of when. So as Virginia gets more and more diverse, you see interesting things happening. We have interesting communities around the state. For instance, we have a Filipino community in Virginia Beach that is growing in strength and power. We see a South Korean community in Northern Virginia. What we find is that the minority groups in Virginia, as in the rest of the country, they're not monolithic. We've seen a Filipino-American Republican elected out of Virginia Beach. We've seen a Korean-American Democrat elected to the legislature out of Northern Virginia. And I think, we've seen Paul Harris, who was an African-American delegate a few years ago from the Charlottesville area. So as we go on, I don't think that any minority group will be seen in monolithic terms. So I think we're going to see an interesting divergence in who has constituted our legislature, perhaps our Congress, depending on what happens with the redrawing of the boundaries.
I think that's right. Don, I know you've done some work relative to outreach to communities, and certainly I think it might evolve to the point where it's issue driven. A lot of black churches took stands against gay marriage. They did not like the position of marriage being anything other than one man and one woman. So I think as issues arise, I think it's going to be candidate and issue driven, and that's when I think you'll see the diversity in these diverse communities start to show itself in the polls. But certainly, if you are a Republican seeking broader base of support than currently exists in the Commonwealth of Virginia, you need to find a way to appeal to a broader demographic. And I think certain issues are going to resonate in certain communities that perhaps the Democrats in the past have always taken for granted. Of course, support can be driven by race, it can be driven by other issues, and I don't think that will necessarily cease, but I certainly think, to Andrew's point, I think there are going to be opportunities for candidates to appeal to demographics that have traditionally voted one party or the next based on individual issues. And it's just going to be a question of how heavily those issues are emphasized and how much of a factor they become in an election, which might also be a function of what that election is. Is it a presidential election? Is it a local election? Is it a statewide election? Where I would say arguably those issues can have the greatest amount of impact.
And in terms of the increasingly diverse population, the African American vote, African American numbers are not growing with the brio that we're seeing among Asians and Latinos. So that presents all sorts of interesting opportunities and challenges as well.
It's interesting. I was talking to Tom Davis, a former congressman from Northern Virginia, who is really smart and frank, which makes him an enjoyable person to interview about politics. But he was talking to me about the growing Asian community in Fairfax County. It's 20% Asian in a county of 1.1 million people. And he says, when you talk about the South Korean community there, which is very large, he said, he's a Republican, he said, those should be our voters. Why? Because many of them are entrepreneurial. Many of them care a lot about their church communities. They care about the family unit. So he said, Republican candidates need to make an effort to go in and talk to those folks and say, we agree philosophically. Tell me about yourself. Tell me about your community. So they need to recruit candidates who will make the effort to get to know these disparate, burgeoning communities, and we'll see how that plays statewide.
Redistricting, of course, discourages that.
Well, on that note, we already been set up for an hour. I appreciate the panelists, well-versed and insightful, and I really enjoyed the questions. Thank you very much. Before we end, are there any veterans here? Thank you for your service on the eve of Veterans Day. Matter of fact, we're having an employee rally later on today, which will honor our veterans as well. Thank you for your service. Thanks for coming down today. And look out for the next election, because these guys haven't given up yet. Appreciate it. Thanks very much. Good job, guys.